Well, recently Debian 10 has come out, and we're going to be taking a look at the Gnome edition right now on Linux Lounge. Now, the first thing to know about Debian, I suppose, especially if you're coming over from, say, Ubuntu or some other distribution, is the way that it's sort of packaged, distributed, whatever you want to call it, is slightly different from that of distributions of, like, say, Ubuntu. Whereas with Ubuntu, you get, maybe one sort of main flavor and then several other different respins of it. Debian is slightly different in that it doesn't really have one particular desktop environment. You're sort of left to choose your own. Now, if you're a new user, this may be slightly off-putting, and what's even more bizarre is the default Debian installation is more an online installer which will let you select your desktop environment, that sort of thing. Another thing to know for new users is that the default Debian ISO does not come with non-free packages, which I suppose, if you're looking to only use free software, that's great. However, if you're looking to, enable hardware that requires non-free drivers, which is basically most Wi-Fi cards and stuff, you will need the non-free Debian installer. And it's not even particularly well shown on their site. It's tucked away a little bit. So in order to get the sort of non-free installer, which I feel like most new users to Debian are going to want, or really just anyone who doesn't really know what they're doing, you're going to have to come over to Getting Debian on their website. Then from the Getting Debian page, you'll probably want to select the A Larger Complete Installation Image section. Then go ahead and download live images using HTTP, FTP or BitTorrent. Go ahead and click on the AMD 64 or the i3-86 options, depending on what your hardware is. And then from this page here, you want to go ahead and set the unofficial image build with the non-free firmware, and you want to click on that second link that says Images, Unofficial Non-Free Images, including firmware. Go ahead and select the live non-free 10.0. Then once again select depending on your hardware. Select the ISO hybrid, and then you have here a variety of options. So if you know which desktop environment you want, go ahead and download it. If not, I would say for most new users, maybe if you want something to rival Ubuntu, use Gnome, because that's what Ubuntu uses also, but honestly, most of these are pretty good options, and you want to go ahead and make sure you're downloading the one with the .iso. And that's how you sort of get your hands on a Debian image that most new users are going to be comfortable working with. Now, I kind of wish that Debian would make this more obvious. However, I suppose their philosophy is very much to not promote the usage of non-free software, which some users will very much appreciate. So I suppose it is what it is, but these are here, and so I say how about we go ahead and get one of these images booted up. And here we are with the Debian Gnome Live ISO booted. Now, once you're sort of in this section here, you can go ahead and play around with Debian and see if it's to your liking before installation. And actually, when you do go to install it, this image here is no more difficult to install than, say, Ubuntu. So in this way, the sort of Debian live images are actually very user-friendly. Now, once you want to get this installed, go ahead and launch the installed Debian, just as you would on Ubuntu, and it will go ahead and launch the Calamares installer. Now, to anyone who is to anyone who has used Manjaro before, this will be rather familiar, as Manjaro also uses a similar installer, or at least it did at one point, and several other distributions also use this. And in my opinion, it is actually a great installer. Very simple, kind of shows you what you need to do. Everything that you would need to configure before installation works perfectly. And indeed, Debian also has that sort of network installer where you can configure things how you would like, such as your desktop environment and that is also very user friendly. So all in all, Debian is actually quite easy to get installed and configured, unlike, say, Arch, for example. And I don't really think a new user would have any more problems with this than they would, say, Manjaro or Ubuntu. The only thing to watch out for is, of course, the default ISO does not come with the non-free packages. However, those can be added after install. So now we've just kind of seen what the live environment looks like. Let's get onto the full installed system. And here it is. As you can see, it is a relatively stock GNOME experience. It's nowhere near as heavily modified as, say, Ubuntu's GNOME, or maybe even, I suppose, Zorin's GNOME, or anyone else's GNOME. And I must say, I greatly appreciate keeping it sort of very stock and standard, so you can do whatever you want with it, configure it to your likings, or you can just leave it as it is, as GNOME's defaults out of the box are very good. But before we start getting sort of into this distribution, let's kind of take a moment to ask, why would you want to use Debian over another distribution like, say, Ubuntu or even something like Manjaro or whatever, that are all very easy to use? And the reason for that, sort of, I've always been a believer of using the source distribution, but the reason is, several reasons. The first of which is just Debian is very widely compatible with all types of hardware. For example, whereas Ubuntu is dropping 32-bit support, Debian is keeping a hold of it. Additionally, Debian is extremely stable, and that's kind of its whole thing. It uses very stable software, which is great. In fact, it's obviously going to be far more stable than, say, Ubuntu. And another thing is, I'm kind of the belief that using a source distribution kind of cuts out any junk that the middleman of Ubuntu could have put in. So you're running like a very stable, unmodified distribution, which sort of, in my experience, will usually give you better stability, will often give you better performance because it's not loaded with stuff that you won't use. However, I find Debian also has very sane defaults, so there's really no reason to modify it, unlike, say, for example, Arch, which kind of essentially has no default in a way. But on to what you actually get with this live image. And I find most of what is bundled is actually very sane and software that I think the average user will probably use. You get your usual GNOME accessories and the likes. Your calculator, choose a calendar, that sort of thing. But also, bizarrely, Debian have decided to include the sort of GNOME games. I'm really not sure why, but they're there, I suppose. They're probably not taking up too much space. There's FCITX, which I believe is a painting tool. So as opposed to bundling something overly heavy like GIMP, the new image manipulation program, that's a good inclusion. And now, curiously, most distributions I find bundle Firefox, and Debian is no exception. And also, Debian seems to have issues working in this particular virtual machine, but when I tried it on actual hardware, it was fine. That's quite unusual. We'll be back in a minute after resolving these technical difficulties. And we are back. Now, that was completely an issue with the virtual machine and nothing to do with Debian. But as I was saying, in sort of keeping with the And we are back. I think I blame the virtual machine for that more than Debian itself. But as I was saying, in sort of keeping with the theme of stability, instead of the usual mainline Firefox, Debian by default ships with Firefox Extended Support Release. Which, as you can see, is very similar to the new Quantum, but the idea behind this is it will get updates less frequently, but it will be far more stable. Now, I'm not really sure whether or not the average user would or would not want to use ESR. It seems to work absolutely fine for everything, and at the moment it's relatively sort of up to date, I suppose. And I guess you're never going to have an issue with it being, you know, the extended support release, which is designed to be more stable. But that maybe will become a problem in the future, but honestly I doubt it, because people have been using ESR for quite a while and it's absolutely fine. Additionally, once again, you get the kind of Gnome games. You also get LibreOffice, which is a great inclusion, you know, sort of good Microsoft Office alternative. You get a few other odds and ends. You get the rest of the Gnome programs, like your music, that sort of thing. There's no sort of VLC or anything like that. Instead, you get Gnome videos, you get Thunderbirds for managing your emails, you get transmissions for torrents, and huge thumbs up from me, the GNOME version of Debian comes with GNOME Tweak Tool out of the box, which of course Ubuntu does not. And to be honest, I believe that this program is essential to using GNOME. Just the amount of things that you can change around is absolutely fantastic, and it just kind of completely changes how one would use GNOME. And that's pretty much all you get from your programs. You know, it's not bloated, but there's enough here to get everything that the average user would want to get done. And of course, you're not expected to use the terminal to install more programs, because there is the GNOME Software Center. So you can install pretty much whatever you would want right here on GNOME. And as you can see, there's a lot of stuff here. Install Chromium if that's more your thing. All sorts of things. So, you know, that kind of does really make me think that the average user would have absolutely no issue using Debian. As I say, it's a very plain experience, but it is boring in the best ways, I suppose. So would I recommend Debian? Yes, absolutely. This is probably one of my most recommended distributions, especially if you like Ubuntu. Is it better than other source distributions like Solus, Arch, that sort of thing? If you're looking for stability, yes, absolutely it is. If you like the apt package manager, absolutely it is. So I would say to just anyone who is currently using Ubuntu watching this video, give Debian a go. You might well prefer it. But I suppose that's all I've got to say about Debian 10. Strong recommendation. Yeah, but I think that's it. Thanks for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.